Hello, my name's Michael Conneely, and this is the Astrology and Healing newsletter for April 2019. And what a month this will be. It's difficult to know what to start with. Should it be Pluto at this time? Rahu and Ketu, Chiron, the great conjunction of Saturn in Sagittarius with Ketu and Pluto, the Mercury-Neptune conjunction, Jupiter in trouble, or rather our reception of Jupiter's blessing in trouble. So I've decided to start with our reception of Jupiter. So basically, Jupiter has just entered Vedic Sagittarius. He's in the first degree. He's only there from March the 29th until April the 22nd. And then he drops back into Vedic Scorpio. But he returns to Vedic Sagittarius on November the 4th. And he's there until November the 20th next year, 2020. And I think it's important to understand that Jupiter is in difficulties, in probably complicated standing, and that means it will have effects on us. And also Jupiter's receiving an aspect from Rahu at the moment, so say you have ascendant in Vishaka ruled by Jupiter, then your Jupiter may be more aggressive and driven because of the aspect from Rahu. So when Jupiter is in trouble, he can become over-dogmatic, over-expansionary and crush other people's sensitivities. But the even more important facet is that we have a weakened connection to Brihaspati Jupiter, to our guru blessing, to our guru energy, to our sense of purpose. And for some people, a troubled Jupiter can make them become too unconfident and think small. And of course, Jupiter is karaka or indicator for husband in a woman's chart. Now, it's a long blog post, and then following it is a wonderful piece from my wife Maggie Pashley about soul realignment healing, and she's actually developing that healing more at a conference in Dublin as we speak. So there'll be more on soul realignment later from Maggie, later on, say in a month's time. But now we're looking at how we can correct the deficiency that will run for a long time to do with our reception of Jupiter Brihaspati's spiritual blessing. And in this long blog post, I mentioned the Rahu-Jupiter aspect. I mentioned the fact that Jupiter's in the Gandanta zone for quite a long time. So Gandanta zones are the transition points from water signs to fire signs, here Scorpio to Sagittarius. And any planet there, by transit or in your birth chart, is rendered immaterial. And coping with that can potentially lead to our developing great spiritual inspiration. But as so much in this life, it's learned from the difficult experience now, or the hard start in childhood, or whatever. So read about Gandanta Jupiter. And I also mentioned the fact that both Jupiter and Saturn have very low velocity in the heavens in April. And this again can actually make things seem very stuck and held up. So it's so good to hear this in advance. And what I'm doing, I found a picture of Jupiter, of Lord Brihaspati off the internet that I like. I'm showing it as the featured image on this blog post. And I'm doing a vision journey to meet Jupiter, like a remedy, like a corrective action, so that the presence of Jupiter will flood into my mind, into my consciousness, into my body. And it's a good idea to do this all the time when Jupiter is in the Gandanta zone, retrograde, going through Sagittarius, where the tricky, very difficult conjunction of Saturn, Ketu, Pluto is, going through the next sign of Vedic Capricorn, where Jupiter is debilitated. Now, the next thing to look at is Saturn and Pluto. Now, as I said, there's a great conjunction of Saturn, Ketu and Pluto in Vedic Sagittarius. It's an energy of reformation, of revolution. It hasn't been there since Martin Luther nailed his thesis to the cathedral door at Wittenberg and brought down the evil rule of the Catholic Church in Northern Europe. Not that, of course, all the problems were corrected with what he put in place instead. So the energy that's being offered to us now is an energy of reformation that hasn't been felt for centuries. How will we handle it? Now, part of it is Saturn conjunct Pluto. So Saturn represents karma, control, structure, discipline. Pluto represents instinctive forces of death and sexuality. Now, Saturn might seek full security in your life by trying to control and imprison Pluto. And some people live their whole lives with their Pluto imprisoned by Saturn. But on the other hand, Pluto might get frustrated. The Pluto power might leak out sideways in self-hatred, sexual warping and all those sort of things. And so all this needs to be faced. Now, when I get time, want to do a series on Pluto in evolutionary astrology. I don't believe that Pluto's destiny in our individual life is the polarity point that we become more like than characteristics of the sign opposite the sign Pluto's in. I believe the key to Pluto is the mythic keys of descent into the underworld of Inanna and Ishtar. And at this time, we may well be called to descend into our underworld, to face the hurt, the power games, the abuse, the darkness. And remember that Ketu is there too in this conjunction. Ketu dissolves, but for spiritual purposes. Ketu won't tolerate false imprisoning structures. You might try and impose them, but you'll regret it. Your life will be ruined. So Ketu will be bringing us lightning inspiration to blow apart our prison walls now, this month, April, and beyond all year. And there's a huge rise of occult and esoteric inspiration because of this Pluto-Ketu-Saturn conjunction. I want to say that the work we have to do with Pluto has a sort of Kabbalistic equivalent, which is going into the abyss, and certainly a lot of ritual magic can be associated with the need to descend into the abyss, to heal buried painful matter there, or, for example, to raise from the abyss. Concepts of godhood, of the divine, that have been lost by humanity and so have subsided into the abyss, but not necessarily, that doesn't mean because they aren't needed. And so the abyss is incredibly important and not to be handled lightly. It needs to be understood, and I'll be doing videos about how to work with the abyss. And the abyss corresponds to Darth in the Kabbalah. We have to go through Darth, through the abyss, to get to Kether, our crown, our connection to the divine light. So the point is, now is a key time for working with the painful buried material so that we go into the abyss and then arise out of it and connect to Kether, which has a clear connection to the divine light. I'll be doing videos about all this. I'm doing work with it with colleagues at the moment. And it extensively modifies what I would say needs to be understood about the nature of evolutionary astrology. There's so many things that evolutionary astrology doesn't bring in, which need to be brought in, and I'll be doing videos about this. You know, like the nature chart versus the nurture chart in psychodynamic astrology. Like the difference between Western and Vedic astrology and how all that ties into evolutionary astrology, but that's for the future. Is there anything else I need to say on that topic? Other than to... Oh, yes. Yes, I recently saw for the first time a film called The Shack. And that is very much about a man returning to his personal abyss. And there learning the supreme need for forgiveness. There meeting the love of God. I'd not heard of the film before. I found it by chance, and I think it was meant at this time of the Great Conjunction, The Shack. So you might like to have a look at that and, you know, understand what I'm trying to talk about further. We all need to go through that, or many of us do. So enough said about that. I'm now going on to Mercury. Well, Mercury is in terrible complications. Mercury's been retrograde since the 6th of March. He turned direct on the 29th of March. But it's important to realise the retrograde effects of Mercury do not end when he turns direct. They only end when he resumes his pre-retrogradation position. So that happens. I'm just trying to skim through the document on the 11th of April. And in the document I mentioned, I've had the most appalling Mercury retrograde experiences, having to sort of redo all the pay buttons on all my websites because the Irish banks are saying that people in Ireland, you know, have to comply with new Irish Treasury regulations because of the probability of Brexit. And so particularly that applies to third-party money transferring things like PayPal and Shopify, which I use. So I had to open a new bank account with loads of documents aligning it to my Irish tax number. I had to open a new PayPal account. I had to alter every single pay button. And then, and this is so typical, lightning struck our phone line. I thought the roof was coming off the house. The thunder was so huge. And it destroyed our router and our printer, and we still haven't got back proper internet service. Mercury retrograde. Now, some people don't suffer from Mercury retrograde periods. That's because in their chart Mercury is okay in its standing, but in my chart Mercury is conjunct Ketu. Mercury is Lord of the 12th. You know, it's appalling. And so every Mercury retrograde period, I approach it thinking, yes, I really have tied up all the loose ends. And then Mercury finds the unimaginable and the vast for me to experience and deal with. So I'm saying that for the benefit of those out there who might be in my position with Mercury retrograde. The other thing is that Mercury is conjunct Neptune as I speak, and this has been wonderful for me. I have had such inspiration for the novel I'm writing. It's called The Morrigan and the Dagda. It's about contacting the Irish gods and goddesses. And that has extended to visionary work to meet the planets as deities. I've learned so much, because of Mercury conjunct Neptune. I really like it. But I know that for some people it can be almost, diabolical confusion and so forth. And what I've written in the blog post is, dare to believe. Dare to make your dreams become real. Dare to make your dreams become real. But also Uranus is transiting opposition my natal Mercury. Uranus is now at 7 degrees Vedic Aries, opposite my natal Mercury, at the very end of a long Uranus to Mercury transit. And, that has been so inspirational for me. Just very recently, I've actually set up a new blog site. It's only got a couple of posts as yet, called Ogham Gods and Runes. So it seeks to honour the ancient alphabets of the ancient Irish and the ancient Norse, the Ogham and the runes, and the gods and goddesses of those two ancient peoples. And I feel this is very much an important expression of my destiny, of my soul destiny, and basically it fulfills my heredity on my birth mother's side from Ireland, on my birth father's side from the Baltic and the shamanic peoples of northern Russia, the Yakut. So there's a section about Venus being conjunct Neptune and going into Pisces, where Venus is exalted, and read that. And then on point 5 of the blog, the Great Conjunction, there's a long section on all the issues there and how to handle it. So basically it's Pluto, Saturn, Ketu. Pluto and Saturn are in Purvashada Nakshatra. So if you have your moon in Purvashada Nakshatra, you're in the very middle of Sade Sate, and get a Sade Sate reading from me. It's an energy of revolution. Pluto is actually retrograde from April the 24th to October the 2nd. And when a planet is retrograde, we're called to experience its energy and message more trenchantly, more deeply, and with more discipline. And Pluto, of course, is about, all our buried power that is buried by false security, by Saturn's attempt to imprison it in a concrete prison of false security. And of course we get nowhere until Pluto explodes the prison and expresses our power. And I feel really pleased at the progress I'm making on that. There was an eclipse on my natal Pluto on the 11th of August 2018, and I felt coming into my power. Pluto is, unaspected in my Western natal chart, and so it's, quite difficult for me to contact or handle my power. But this is unlocking it. And now I have Moon transiting square Pluto, and shortly Pluto transiting my Moon, and shortly Pluto transiting square my Sun. The nodes are transiting my Pluto. So I feel at last I'm coming into my power and expressing that through my work and in my life. Pluto is such a gift if handled rightly, if understood. I also mentioned the combination of Pluto and Ketu, which needs to be understood. Deep stuff, deep psychological survival stuff, deep transformation, deep intensity and coming into power. Betrayal issues arise for you to face and deal with if betrayal occurred early in your life. Arise now like the phoenix from the ashes. Cultivate forgiveness. Remember the shack. I mention that there's a couple, I give two examples of the effects on countries in the world of the Saturn K2 conjunction. I mentioned the United States, and there's a long bit on Turkey, and have a read there. I remember recently there was the failed coup of the middle-class educated Turks, particularly Istanbul, in 2016. And now they have overthrown the president in those sort of areas. But the mass of the population is quite fundamentalist Islam, and the president knows this. Will the country, therefore, become a fundamentalist Islamic state? And I even wonder, this is obviously speculation, is it possible that a huge Islamic superstate could arise, stretching from Morocco across to, Tajikistan, that sort of area? What a huge area that would be if the sort of religious differences could be sunk. And could it just be that the business leaders of these Islamic countries could recognise what power, what business power unity would bring, what power of resources? Could it be that some spiritual leader might newly arise and be backed? And if such an Islamic state arose, I'm only asking this because of the K2 Saturn conjunction potential, if such a superpower arose, the position of the United States would then become very fraught and complicated. Remember what happened to Rome in 410 AD. The river Rhine froze over, the Huns, the Visigoths and the Vandals crossed the frozen river. They marched down and they sacked the imperial